We learned this morning through dogged reporting from the Washington Post that President Trump engaged in a dramatic act of misdirection last month to avoid a security threat from Iran as he was departing the NATO summit in Turkey. Trump boarded an older version of Air Force One, then secretly left that plane, hiding inside a catering container to take another plane. Both of those planes flew to England, where the president was able to switch back and do so undetected. Reporters and White House staffers on board the decoy plane had no idea the president was not on board. They were, therefore, unwittingly exposed to some measure of danger. And even after the threat was over, long over, the White House disclosed nothing about this particular maneuver. Our Ed O'Keefe joins me now from the White House. And Ed, I'm glad the weather today is much better than it was yesterday. Describe what we've learned and what are the implications of all of it?
Well, what we've learned is what you laid out there, that there had been a threat. U.S. intelligence said it was facing a potential threat of Iran trying to attack the aircraft as the president was leaving a NATO member country, Turkey, but one that sits right next to Iran. And so they took this step. And people may recall that the morning that he was leaving Turkey, he announced on Truth Social, hey, remember my new plane that I flew over here in? Well, it's such a hit, we're sending it to the UK so the troops can take a look at it. And that immediately set off alarm bells with the press that, no, that could not have been the reason. There must have been something up with security concerns. We later reported here at CBS, as did other outlets, that in fact, yes, there were concerns the Secret Service had with potential vulnerabilities with the new jet because it doesn't have some capabilities that the older blue and white ones do. Well, now we learn it wasn't just about the jet, but it was in fact about making sure that the president himself wasn't on the jet that people thought he would be on, out of concern that it might get hit by some kind of shoulder-fired missile. So the White House not confirming this directly, but saying in part that there are enemies of America who have their sights on President Trump, and, quote, we use every tool at our disposal to address those threats. We spoke with former Secret Service officials today who say, look, if there was in fact credible intelligence saying he was at risk and they took these elaborate steps to get him out of there, then that was keeping with agency protocol. And given that he got safely out of Turkey to the UK, was able to board the new jet along with reporters and staff and get back to the U.S. safely, then the plan worked as it should have. Where there is concern here at the White House and in the Secret Service is that word of this got out at all, because it potentially blows their ability to do this again, either domestically or overseas, should he face similar threats in the future. And he continues to face regular threats from Iran and, of course, all the other attempted assassinations of the president in the last 2-3 years. So this remains a president definitely facing serious threats, and obviously now we see what the Secret Service had to do to get him safely home.
Ed, very quickly, 2 questions. This is a decoy of a decoy. That suggests this was a pretty serious threat and that these maneuvers underscore the seriousness of it. Also, in 2000, President Clinton did something similar in Pakistan. Walk us through those 2 points.
And the difference there is that reporters were briefed in advance that it would happen. He was going from India to Pakistan. They thought he would board one of those larger military transport planes when, in fact, staff and reporters did. He then walked around the corner to another unmarked white jet. They flew in a smaller version of the blue and white Air Force One, sort of like a Learjet-sized jet. I don't remember the name of it or the model number. And at the time, it looked as if that's the one President Clinton got off of because there was a Secret Service agent that resembled him, when, in fact, another jet flew in right behind it, and Clinton got off of that one. So that's the one known case of a president taking a decoy aircraft into another country or out of another country into another country because of a potential threat. And at the time, it was Osama bin Laden that they were worried about and his terrorist groups ahead of 9/11. There have been times when presidents have flown into war zones. George W. Bush for the holidays, Barack Obama to Afghanistan. But again, reporters were briefed in advance and asked under embargo to keep that secret for the sake of the operation. In this case, no evidence that reporters were ever told this was going on. And that is what's caused some concern today, at least in the press. And yet there are those in the law enforcement community who say the fact that this was revealed at all now potentially puts the president at even graver risk.
Ed O'Keefe, North Lawn of the White House. Thank you so much. I want to bring in former CIA officer and Marine Corps veteran Elliot Ackerman. He's also a CBS News contributor. Elliot, your thoughts on what Ed said and the contours of this story as we know it?
Well, Major, I think the real headline for me is it just shows the stakes of the war in Iran, and let's take a moment to imagine how the nature of that war would change if something did happen to the president. And so this conflict could not be more dangerous, and the potential for it to escalate, I think, should have all Americans paying close attention.
Yeah, walk us through that, Elliot, because if something had been fired at Air Force One, even though President Trump was not on it, that would be considered a full-blown mega act of war, and the entire attitude of this nation and its firepower, some of it withheld, would probably be unleashed or considered to be unleashed.
It would, and I don't think it's an exaggeration to say that it would completely change the game, because it would demand a response from the United States, an escalation from the United States. And that's how, and if you look in the past or history, regional wars can grow, can become world wars. If you look at the First World War, it started with the assassination of a head of state. So, if anyone needed to be reminded that the war in Iran is a very high stakes game, this should remind them.
And your thoughts about the misdirection, what it said about the credibility of the threat, and the fact that it was never disclosed, and those who were on the decoy plane were none the wiser.
Right. And I think, what Ed was talking about earlier. I mean, yeah, obviously it really shows how norms have changed since the Clinton era. That, I can't imagine a scenario where the threat credible, where the press, would be informed ahead of time, just because so much has changed since the year 2000. But again, it is yes, that operation has been blown. So if the Secret Service faces a similar threat in the future, they're going to have to come up with a different protocol to get the president safely home.
And is that an operational hazard?
It certainly is. I think from the perspective of the individuals who are in charge of the president's safety, they would much rather have all of this under wraps. And that has to be held in balance with the fact that the press, as the representatives of the American people, need to know the whereabouts of the president.
Elliot, setting this aside for the moment, other things happened today and have been happening for the last 3 or 4 days that seem to be moving in an escalatory direction regionally. What's your evaluation of where this conflict stands right now?
We've gone with a conflict that, opened up, and it was about, nuclear weapons. It was about the Iranian regime and their oppression of their own people, and the destabilization that they've had in the region. And now it's shifted into a conflict where the most important issue, or one of the most important issues, is the Strait of Hormuz. And the Iranians have discovered they have enormous leverage with that, not only against the United States, but against our partners in the region. So, this conflict has gone from something that we hoped, I'm sure the administration hoped, would be a surgical decapitation that would lead to a regime change, to now something that is drawing out and continues to draw out, and one in which the Iranians get a lot of leverage by waiting out the United States. And they know we have midterm elections coming up soon, and I don't think this war is coming to an end anytime soon.
Elliot Ackerman, always a pleasure, sir. Thank you very much.